first question, have you ever been exposed to philosophy, read philosophical works? That can come in any type of medium too, so it doesn't have to just be something written. Cinema, music, any of those are fine as well. Okay. Plato's Republic.
Socrates and Aristotle.
Okay. The Prince by Machiavelli. Yes. Kant. Okay, good. So let's just take care of business right now. Last name for those who just contributed. What is it? Coulter. Do you say Holter? It's so hard to hear. Holter. There we go. M. Oh. Who else wants points? It deserves it. It did, but to get the points. Did I miss anybody that didn't? All right, you also have a chance to have the points in. Now, again, obviously, if we're going to take a philosophy course, perspectives on philosophy, we want to know what it is that we're doing. I just find it interesting what people think philosophy is before they experience it. What I thought philosophy was before I was introduced to philosophy, I was introduced to philosophy my senior year of high school. But I remember as a sophomore, something like that, like I kind of had this conception of philosopher, like obviously they have beards, right? And they're up on top of a mountain pontificating, kind of proverbial, this is what I thought, kind of like fortune cookie like statements that sound smart, but like you really don't, nobody really knows what it means. Like, for example, somebody says, we don't have time to do that. Somebody responds back, well, you have to make time. And the philosopher jumps in and says, no, you don't make time, time makes you. People are all, oh, yeah. Like a fortune cookie kind of thing. And so I remember a sophomore actually going, I'm going to try my hand at philosophy and just writing out all these kind of proverbial wittisms or something like that. It was stupid. Like, I thought that's what philosophy was. I mean, it's not too far. I mean, it's not like way out in left field or something like that. Now, what other people thought, like when I started studying philosophy, I remember I had this like neighbor, and of course he was always like had his beer in his hand, and he's like, "Hey, come on over here. What are you doing? What are you doing lately?" I'm like, "I'm studying philosophy." Whoa, trippy, man. Hey, how do I know I exist? I'm not here. And I'm like, is that really what you think like philosophers are running around like, hey, I don't exist. I don't know if I exist. And so I told him, I'm like, I don't know. That sounds more like drug abuse to me than philosophy, right? Like people I know running around or asking, saying stupid stuff like that are not philosophers, but people whacked out of their mind on drugs or something, or really drunk. I've heard other people say that, oh, it's always this like, oh, trippy. So we could be like living on Earth, but the Earth is like a cell on like another person's arm. Like, and I'm like, that sounds like drug abuse again. Like, who do you really think? Like, I'm offended that you think philosophers would think these You just come up with these like really trippy. So, well, part of that is just inexperience, not being exposed to weird ideas and things people think philosophers do and think about. So it will be interesting to see what you think, and then if that changes throughout the semester as we go through. So somebody comes up to you and asks you, number 2, what is philosophy? What would you tell them?
Like a questioning or study of the human thought process.
Okay, good. Last name?
Long.
I feel like I need glasses or something. I don't know what's going on with that. Not sunglasses, but
Oh, like you think questions, they can also kind of explaining why, like
okay. Last name?
for all
With
individual.
a what? An M?
Yeah, with an M.
Yeah, you should do that. It's hard for me to hear up here. I'm going blind as death. M. There it is. So by the time it reaches here, it mutates into like I can't hear if it's an M or an N or an L. Yes.
Study of reasoning or ideas about knowledge.
Okay, good. Last name. Now that was easy to hear. You have a very clear and distinct voice. I appreciate that. Well, if I had extra points, I would give it to you.
It said like the process of questioning stuff that comes up.
So it seems to me that everybody's talking about questions here. That's good. Something to do with questioning. Last name?
Lang.
Yeah, that helps so much. Man. Go ahead. Good. Last name? Yes. We're just going to go down the rows. Go ahead.
Questioning how things.
Oh, that's good. Last name?
Arnold. Kind of like questioning basic things like knowledge or reality about what's in today's life.
Last name?
The study of logic and reasoning, like just a different way to think about things in the world.
Last name?
All
With a,
age.
see, it's funny, it almost sounded like a P by the time it hit my ears. So that's why. Anybody on this side? Let's do here and then back.
So it's study of knowledge and ideas.
Good. It seems like you guys are all hitting on the same last name. The same stuff. Good. Raise your hand if you never heard the word skepticism before. Does anybody think they could tell me what skepticism is?
I'm pretty sure it's just questioning the world around you and like evaluating things and not taking any answer as already proven.
I'm glad that you didn't say skepticism is being skeptical. Yeah, doubt, questioning, good. Did I give you your points? No, in the back. Anybody else? Yeah, we have more questions too, but
I'd say philosophy is the study of knowledge, questions of life.
okay, good. Last name?
Uh,
Right here, huh?
what?
Richardson.
Dickerson.
Oh, gee. You got to give me the letters. I'm not going to be able to.
I think philosophy is statement of
All right. All right, I'll let the rest of you get. Okay, so sometimes when you come across stuff that's not so clear, you guys got some pretty good answers on that. But what we like to do is use something that's more clear to elucidate what's less clear? What's obscure? It's a principle that goes back to Aristotle, who had said that if something isn't clear, when you want to explain something to somebody, what do you say? For example, the examples you don't want to give is something further down the list that's even more obscure. What do you want to do? You don't go for a child asking how a bicycle works. You don't want to say, well, son, it's really interesting. You should ask that because there was a scientist named Werner Heisenberg, and he had this thing called the uncertainty principle, which dictates and states that you cannot know the velocity and directionality of a particle at the same time. If you isolate the velocity, you lose the direction and vice versa. And that brings me to my next lecture on quantum entanglement, son. And he's like, what? Well, what did you do? You just went to something that was far more complicated and not as clear to explain something, right? Rather than more clear. You go to, when you use examples, you go to something that's more clear. Maybe you show like how a ball kind of rolls and says, well, it's kind of like that. And so we call this mechanics, right? Or something like that. So we do the same thing. Go with what's more familiar, more clear, to elucidate what's less clear, not the other way around. So whether we're STEM, majoring in science or math or anything like that, regardless of that, we live in a contemporary, technological, modern age in which we all know what science is. Maybe it's not so clear what philosophy. So why don't we use that? Why don't we take the sciences and compare them to what's not so clear? Compare and contrast. And as we go through, what we'll start to see is we'll start to have this elucidated. So that's the purposes. But first, let me narrow in just to make it easier what we mean by the science. I'll focus on what's called the hard or the empirical sciences. Maybe we should define empirical. How many people have heard that word empirical before? Does anybody think they can give me a synonym or tell me what empirical is? What does that word mean?
But I guess use of like numbers and data in order to like evaluate or something.
Oh. Who else wants to try? You're all going to go for that one, huh? That's all the hands. That's all the no more hands.
And it must be something you observe.
Yes.
I was going to say
Empirical is synonymous with physical matter. How do you study physical matter? You observe or you use your senses. So what are the hard sciences, the empirical sciences? The physical sciences. And the means of studying physical matter is the senses, either directly or indirectly. By either just direct observation, or if our senses aren't that great, we build instruments like telescopes, microscopes, or even indirectly, like electronic microscopes or sonar, or different things like that to study physical. So now we have an idea. The hard empirical sciences are distinguished from what's called the soft sciences. Well, let's just try to get a list real quick. Name me some common hard empirical sciences. Geology, chemistry, Physics. And if you give an answer and your name hasn't been recorded for the participation points, let me know and then I'll add them in. Biology. Yeah, somebody asked, brought that up the other day. I think I would include that. Somebody asked, would that be a species of biology? I don't know, because then it maybe geology too, like, but yeah, I'd say that's a hard empirical science. Yes. Yes. Astronomy, not astrology, astronomy. Astronomy. I know, I read your mind. Did I give you points? Did I give everybody points as participated so far? What would soft sciences be? Psychology? Sociology? Did I give you points? No. Last name. What other ones? So what did we say? Sociology, psychology? No, but good guess. No, that wouldn't be, even though they put the word. I don't know, that's an interesting one. I don't, maybe. I don't know. That's a great, we need to find the answer to that. That one's not so clear to me. We'll start with the more clear. Anthropology, things like that. Well, why is one hard and one soft? So what's the deal?
One's physical.
But aren't people and societies physical? Thoughts aren't. Somebody had mentioned, yeah, but it's harder to kind of observe political structures the same way that you would. I mean, how do you study politics? You get your microscope out and you're like, how do you judge a good political regime? I personally do a titration test and measure the pH balance on. I'm like, well, obviously you can't. This society's too acidic, and this was too basic. I can't. Do you weigh them? How do you study human beings? Put them in the Erlenmeyer flask and under a bunch of. So it becomes more difficult to use those kind of hard empirical methods, the scientific method, to study things that are kind of in the domain of anthropos, right? Anthropology, sociology, psychology, things like that. Although they might, yes. I think zoology would be a hard science, don't you guys think? Because I mean, it's got the kind of same classifications like as biology, genus, species, and studying the same way biology would be. Now, the soft sciences are still considered maybe sciences. Now, maybe the people in the empirical sciences are like, no, get those people away from us. Don't give them the title science, right? Actually, they kind of think like that. But I've commonly thought they're sciences because they share some of the same kind of methodologies or something like that. You might use statistical analysis and things like that. You use math in both, right? But it's not exactly the same. It's not as hardcore empirical as, this isn't as hardcore empirical as that. Okay, good. Now that we kind of have an idea of what, and then as you had brought up, then there's stuff that don't fit into either one of those. Number 4, now that we have kind of an idea, somewhat of an idea, what do you think the difference between the hard empirical sciences are and philosophy? So here we have another versus philosophy.
One's like measurable, one's like not as measurable, I guess.
Does everybody agree, disagree? You can disagree too. I allow disagreement in my class, encourage it. Interesting. I'm trying to think of an objection. Is there anything in philosophy that could be measured?
Well, philosophy being measured.
Yeah. Well, let's go to your, and then I'll come back to, okay, what's the difference? A difference between empirical sciences and philosophy.
Actually test empirical science. You can't really test. So whenever I've engaged in a philosophical argument, conversation, it's always been, what if? I get told what if.
Do you think the way that you test things is the same across all kind of disciplines? Like, so I don't know if you meant you can't empirically test. That's why I was kind of making the joke with why these are sauce. It's like it's hard to empirically test anthropology and stuff like that, because the way that you study politics or something like that, or societies, isn't necessarily the exact same way that you would in chemistry, something like that, right? Physical evidence could be, yeah.
I said like philosophy is more of logical reasoning and argumentation along science, like empirical sciences is more like numbers, facts, and evidence that can be proven true.
Okay.
Empirical sciences are like retrospective.
Do you think could that be? Always, or for the most part? I didn't give you your points, did I? Was there anybody else I left out for last time? Ella's the only one, but Ella, are you here? You're the last. No, you're not. You're battling with McKenna. She's not here. Then you are, by default, the last one. So I mean, at some point, you're gonna have to answer the question. Okay, let's go a little bit further. We're gonna do a compare and contrast. Now notice I've set these up in kind of that they build on. Each further one builds on the previous one. I put this word attempts because you have to attempt something before you actually do it. Yes. I can't tell you that. That's a secret. Well, here, look. Here's the way that I teach. This is my philosophy about teaching. Is that I never want to tell you what to think. My job is to teach you how to think. And so, in many respects, it's irrelevant what I actually think. I want to give you the tools so that you can actually do it and think through these things correctly and get the right answer. Plus, it's no fun if I just tell you what the answer is. So I'll always be that way. I'm not going to preach to you, be like, you got to accept this position. I'm more concerned with you learning the tools. And that's something really rewarding about philosophy, because when you do get an answer, when you do write out something, it's not because your professor told you that quote unquote answer. It's because like, I put the hard work in. There's a personal kind of achievement and responsibility. So maybe I would do you a disservice if I just told you what I thought. Now, after, I might give some ideas and stuff like that later, but I want you to work through first. And you can always challenge me too. That's part of philosophy, is if you're going to go, I disagree, and you go back and forth. This is called dialectics. So arguments in philosophy are not shouting matches. You ever hear people say that, like, it's just so argumentative, it's so bad, right? Well, philosophy, it's a good thing, but there's kind of rules to argumentation. You can't, be like, right, and scream at somebody and criticize their character. You're to critique their ideas and separate it from their person or personal character, achievements, or flaws. That's all the philosopher is concerned about. Like, I don't care. I want to know what the argument is and if it's good, and I'm going to try to break it down. If it doesn't break down, then it sounds like a good argument. Maybe I should accept it. That's kind of like what you'll start to experience through here. So notice, before I can do something, I have to attempt it, right? And there might be many things. Just because I attempt something doesn't mean I accomplish it. I'm going to attempt to. How many people have hiked Mount Helena? So I could be like, well, I'm going to attempt to do power line in 30 minutes. I don't know if I can actually do that at this point. What's crazy is I see people and they'll have like their kids in their bed. They're like going out. I'm like, it makes me feel so shame. I'm like, I'm like, oh. I'll get there though. But notice there's a difference between attempting to get there in a certain amount of time versus actually doing it. So first things first, right? What does something attempt to do? What do you think science attempts to do regardless of what? And by the way, did you know irregardless is not a word? People always say it's regardless. Yeah. You learn something non-philosophical in philosophy class. Yes, and then you. Okay, what the heck is a hypothesis? Okay, go ahead. Okay. Yes. And the list is complete. We can save it. See you guys. Well, let's do this back and forth, this compare and contrast. So what you said about science, and you can add some more too. Philosophy, does philosophy attempt to prove things? You say no. Is there any yeses? Yes, man. Yes, man. You say yes. Okay, that's fine. I'm just getting to. I'm not looking for right or wrong answer. Just curious what you think. What was the other one that? Does philosophy have hypotheses? Okay. What was, and then what was the one prior to that? What science attempts to do? So we had prove things, establish hypotheses, was it? Prove a hypothesis, and then there was one more. Somebody else said, or add another one. What? Or we can just move on to the second question.
Science tries to predict the physical world.
Oh, that's interesting. Good. Science is concerned with predictions about the physical world. Is philosophy necessarily? Maybe, I don't know. That's an interesting one.
With science, I mean, after you prove your hypothesis, and you go to a scientific theory after it's been reviewed by a bunch of other scientists, and it's still discussed, not law, but still theory. And sometimes theories never become law, so I guess it can intermix that way.
You mean intermarry? Oh, intermix.
Yeah.
You can use analogies like that. It's actually kind of cool. Well, let's move on because we're going to get into theory. But let's start with the facts. Is science concerned with facts? Wrong. No, yes. Okay, facts. By the way, what would you say a fact is? Maybe we should define that. Okay, that's interesting. So both of you have something kind of similar. Does anybody else want to? Undoubtedly true. Something you can't dispute, something that's proven.
Or the claim that can be repeated.
That can be repeatedly proven?
Yeah.
Universally accepted. Okay, here's my question to you. Taking everything that you said, my little pushback here. Let me start with this question. Do you prove facts?
Yeah.
Or does it become a fact once you prove it?
It was already a fact before you proved it.
Do you see what he's getting on to? Do you see the distinction in the question? Is something become a fact when somebody, like you said, universally accepts it, proves it, or it's indisputable, or are facts things prior to you prove it and you prove facts? Do you see the difference? So you're saying prior to, it doesn't become a fact when you prove it. It's a fact, a fact, and you try to prove it so that people universally accept it or something.
Yeah, fact is something that's true in an objective reality.
Oh, that's good, Dustin. What do you guys think? Yes, no? Okay, so in that sense, we would still all agree science is concerned with facts. Why? Because it tries to prove them. What a fact? It tries to prove things about how things objectively are. Okay, good. See how we're getting further in this? Is philosophy concerned with facts? Yes, no, yes, yes. Any more no's? A little bit of both, good. We have the nuanced person in the classroom that says a bit of both. Okay. I'm going to ask you the next question, does science deal with theories? But maybe I should ask you, again, just as I did with facts, what is a theory? John. Okay. Somebody else want to piggyback on that or add to that?
It has to have substantial evidence behind it as well before it's considered a theory.
Okay, that's interesting because I've joked with my mother. So when I was a kid, she'd be like, "I need you to pick up your room, and you haven't." And I'm like, "Well, that's an interesting theory, mother, but can you prove it?" She'd be like, "Okay, you're grounded." Smart aleck.
Theories in science are around 90% indisputable.
Okay, I mean, are there different types of theories? Go ahead.
I think there are different types of theories. There are small theories. Like your
Mom.
mother,
Yeah.
that kind of a theory. That's not like science.
Yeah, so what if we say there are those that are accepted theories, then there's those as a theory is an idea that has yet to be proven. Is that your position?
Use the word scientific theory, which would be the one that's almost always true. I started to become a lawyer. And then your mom had a theory, but that's not a scientific theory.
What do you guys think? My mind's thinking about objections. That's why I paused. Are there different types of theories in science? Sometimes I'd like to say there's capital T theory and there's lowercase theory, and maybe even distinctions here. accepted but not law, maybe. An idea is accepted. Then maybe there's also theory as an idea or hypothesis not yet proven or accepted.